Welcome back to the Curdverse. I'm Lisa Kaywood, corporate functionary by day, home cheesemaker by night. I've spoken many times in different episodes about aging cheese, how long various cheeses are aged most often, sometimes about how their rinds are treated or aren't treated during that time. But cheeses from the same batch of milk can turn out completely differently depending on where they're aged, because each individual aging space will develop its own set of native molds and bacteria which all contribute to the final character of the cheese. I got to make the comparison firsthand between the same cheeses aged in different spaces long before I ever began making cheese myself, and I go into more detail on this in an accompanying blog. So I was very excited to talk to a guy who plays around with cheese aging spaces for a living. Yes, you can make a living just by aging cheese. I hope you enjoy this interview with Perry Wakeman of the Affinage House Rennet and Rind in Cambridge, England. All right, Perry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Perry, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm the chief of cheese at a company called Rennet and Rind, which is based in Cambridge, UK. And what I'm kind of really known for is my role that I play pretty in the British industry in the art of affinage, which is maturing cheese. And I suppose the most recent accolade that I achieved was becoming Britain's first ever Affineur of the Year. And that was obviously a huge honour, and I was really, really happy with that because I've been practicing the art of affinage for many years. So to be recognised in the first ever competition ever is quite a big tick in the books for me.
Indeed.
So yeah.
Indeed. So, well, tell us a little bit about how you got into this. I mean, were you, and when other kids were playing with fire trucks, you were playing with cheeses, and you decided, I just need to become an affineur when I grow up? Or how did that come about?
No, no, not at all. So my family were heavily into food. We always were a food family. Whatever we'd do, it would be, sort of farm shops and like good kind of food, good cooking, and that kind of life associated around that. But I was actually really interested in computers when I was younger. And I kind of started my career, my work life in IT. I was an IT consultant in London.
So then you know the joke that a junior developer is one who hopes to get rich enough to retire to a private island, and a senior one is one who gets rich enough to retire to a mushroom farm.
Yeah, there you go.
And now you're a mushroom farmer.
I was, yeah. It was all too much for me, really. The fast pace of London, and we call it over here like champagne lifestyle lemonade budget. So I had an amazing expenses budget, and I was utilizing that expenses budget to eating in some of the best places at quite a very young age. And I think my palate and interest grew there. And then I went to this really fabulous restaurant in London, and it was the first kind of cheese trolley I ever witnessed. And it's kind of like something to behold. So, but before that, my knowledge was really, really basic, and I just found it incredible that, these people were, all these varieties that I knew had like so many backstories, and people were so passionate about everything, and I needed to know more. So off I went to the British Artisan Cheese Awards. Everyone there was so friendly, so enthusiastic. I went on like the kind of the pre-award day where I met like Mary Quick, who's a phenomenal cheesemaker down in Devon, the Joneses, Simon and Tim, who make Lincolnshire Poacher, and everyone was just really welcoming, inviting to farms, and I was like, this is for me. And as soon as you start breaking, beneath that surface of what cheese means to you when it's younger, which is kind of like a a food source, and you start scratching and you start seeing artisan, the relationships that artisan cheesemakers have with their cattle, and it's just so beautiful. And then it just kind of went from there. I trained over in France in the art of affinage. I met Mark, who's our MD, started working for him I met him on Friday, started on Monday, and then we built this sort of beautiful cheese maturing business together, which is Rennet and Ryan today.
Awesome. All right, so let's dive into a little bit about what exactly is affinage. I mean, why can't you just stick a cheese in a fridge and call it good?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I suppose so. So it's the art of really using selective pressures to get the best out of your cheese. So humidity, temperature, brushing, washing, turning, loads of different kind of techniques to get that cheese to be the best that it can be. And yeah, it's I think a lot of people see it when they put it in their fridge, cheese. You've got this kind of this immortal product which, you're taking all the moisture out of it, it kind of lives forever. And then you pop it in your fridge, and within 7 days, it begins to grow a new rind on the surface of the cheese that some people may be afraid to eat, or it dries out really quickly. And that's a really curious thing, that when a cheese is exposed to your own fridge and you're opening and closing that fridge, it's changing the temperature, it's changing the humidity, it's drying out quicker. The cheese goes, I really don't like this, and you're not going to enjoy me as much as you did a couple of days ago. And that is a kind of micro scale of what I do on a much larger scale. And I will go into the maturing rooms every day. And so we've got five at Rennet and Rind: a drying room, a heated room, a kind of cheddar room, a blue room, and then a slowing room that we like to call. Um, and you look at each cheese, inspect the rind, inspect how, sort of spongy it is that day, or the biofilm that's built up between the cheese and the wooden shelves, and you make a decision in that moment of what does that cheese need right now. Does it need to change location to a better airflow, or does it need a little bit of brushing or washing, or does it need new molds kind of around it to actually surround the cheese to create different flavors? And then at that point, when you're a little bit stumped, you get your cheese iron out, which is a truncated kind of T shape, and you plunge it into the cheese when visually I can't work out what's going on, give it a taste, and then decide a new path for that cheese or the same one.
So, let's talk a little bit about those five different rooms. Why do you have five different rooms, and what does each one of them bring to a cheese?
Yeah. So certain cheese types. So for example, your bloomy rind, so your bries and your goat's cheeses, perhaps like a dry situation within the first 48 hours. It kind of resets the rind, dries it out, gives it the best chance that it needs to get the good bacteria landing on the outside and the flora. So that's the drying room. So we use that, and then we've got a heated room, which is more for your like cooked curd cheeses. So like Emmentaler and more those Alpine sweets. So we're going up to 13.5 degrees. And then a cheddar room is kind of like around about 10.5 degrees. Runs a bit hotter than most cheddar
Hmm.
stores
Hmm.
actually, but I found that area seems to really work for me to create some diverse flavors. So each cheese type just needs a different environment, and obviously over time, that environment that builds up is not only temperature. We're looking at different bacteria and microflora that will grow, biome within those rooms. So certain cheeses respond to that. So yeah, there's this kind of, when I was learning affinage in France, there's kind of like a strict rule set that this cheese is for this room, this cheese type of cheese is for this one. But over the particularly last 5 years, I've been finding characteristics that have kind of cross-pollinated from blue cheeses to cheddars, and mixing it up a bit and changing them into some other environments. So I used to say, this is strictly for the cheddar, strictly for the sweeter cheeses, but each one of those rooms, does a certain thing to the cheese, and the variables can be completely different as well. It's really hard to nail down because every cheese is different, and it kind of creates this environment where you need those levers to be able to pull and move to different areas. We had a real extreme batch of a wash rind cheese over here, which is called Ashcombe, which is like a Morbier style. And I ended up, because the rind was just really overactive, it kind of really went this bright peachy color. So I reset the rind by, and this is the part of affinage as well, is scraping that rind off with a knife, resetting the wash, the brine that we're washing it in, so more bacteria on the outside, and then actually leaving it in the drying room, which I've never done with wash rind cheeses because they tend to crack in a dry environment. But I just left it in there for 12 hours to reset the rind with the biome on. And this mild cheese, which is kind of like milky dairy, nice bit of sweet nut, turned into a real savory, meaty
Mm.
beast. And then that's the idea, really, is that then I've got this amazing portfolio of amazing customers that are all different. And you have this one product, a Baron Bigod, for example, which is a British Brie de Meaux style. And it can come in so many different forms and suit so many people. Whether, I'm really stereo typicalizing, I suppose, here, but the younger palate prefers a slightly more chalky middle, which is lighter and more fresh, lactic, grassy milk with a little touch of the mushroom, where an older profile prefers the big, no lactic fresh in there. They just want deep, savory, oozy cheeses. So it goes to show that you can get one cheese and you can turn it into 17 different styles of cheeses.
And so, do you sell them at sort of different ages, or do you typically have this type of cheese is going to be this way on a really consistent basis, or is your brand much more about this is artisan, it's always going to be slightly varied, this particular wheel is going to be this way and you can only get it now?
Yes,
Fair
it's
enough.
all of those. So I love the variability of cheese. I love when a cheese is bad and when a cheese is good. It's very strange that no cheese is ever really bad. There's always a customer type, and thankfully, I have a large portfolio of customers that, if a cheese turns out too bitter, then I can think of that guy that, he could go in his restaurant because he really likes that note. And, they're big bitter drinkers and they like that kind of edge. So it always has a place, but sometimes, and I call it kind of the thing I say is, what is it? If you didn't love me at my worst, you can't have me at my best, and that's kind of artisan cheese in a Love Actually kind of way. Uh, because I love the idea. I love the idea of there's this one batch that I get asked about a lot, which was a Northern Irish cheese, which was called Young Buck, and a couple of Christmases. So it's a raw, unpasteurized Stilton style, made by a chap called Mike. And there was this one profile which was just knockout. Do you know, like it's like the one that you can't write a tasting note because it's so perfectly balanced. And I did a really large virtual, and yeah, I picked that cheese for those customers. And everyone, blue lovers were just, you know, virtually falling off their screens as they were eating it. And I still have, sort of 100 at home customers who call up every now and again and remember that batch. And I think affinage is that it's a lot of note taking, a lot of trying to repeat, that kind of creation or the things that you did to get to that goal. So you're always after that one perfect profile. of cheese. And so online, our kind of biggest product that we sell is the mystery cheese box. It's not really a mystery. Um, it was something that was born out of COVID to kind of help British artisan cheesemakers sell a lot of cheese, and we could really get behind it. I was doing weekly videos at that time. It's now become like Perry's best cheeses that have been matured that month, but that doesn't really sound great for marketing, does it? And I'm too scared to change the name now. So all the profiles that kind of come in at that point align with one another. So there are five cheeses, which is soft, hard, a blue, and then two either wash rind or maybe a goat or sheep sometimes. But they all perfectly complement each other as you eat them. So we had a really interesting one in our box this month, which was an old Rhone Wensleydale style, traditionally cloth bound, real kind of creme fraiche, sour cream, acidity, not just lemon, just really complex. And we ate that before we ate a really great cheddar called Westcombe cheddar. But what the old Rhone Wensleydale did, it kind of primed your taste buds by
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming it with acidity. And then when you moved into the Westcombe, which is a real zippy tang, longevity, big cheddar on that kind of tang, it it killed it. So all you had left was the
Mm-hmm.
bass notes of the Westcombe, which was so fascinating. And I had so many people compliment me about, everyone's used to this kind of big, long, massive profile Westcombe, but the old Rhone complemented it perfectly because it kind of kicked that into touch, and you could really get into these warm, savory, and nutty flavors, which I hadn't discovered in
Hmm.
Westcombe for a long time. So yeah, and if people buy online the individual items, I look at what they've got in their basket, and then I'll select a profile which I think will work well for them. Or they'll leave me a message and say, "Could we have Perry's profile, please?" Or Granddad's coming, and
He likes these
he
kinds of
he
cheeses.
he's
Yeah.
got
Okay.
some extreme taste. Yeah, he's got extreme taste buds. Could you? We want it crawling off the cheese board,
Granddad's
please.
kind of an old fart. We need old fart cheeses, please.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Yeah. So that's how we select our profiles. But yeah, it's more regimented with the restaurants. With people at home, the mystery cheese box pulls into that, and unless it's
So
requested.
do the
Yeah.
restaurants expect more sort of a consistency, same thing every time kind of thing?
Yes and no. It's once again a double answer. I'm like a politician. You're not going to get a straight answer from me. Um, but yeah, so they expect a degree of consistency, and because we run our boards, our selection for our restaurants over 4 weeks, that's easier to obtain than
Hmm.
over the course of a year, for example. But we're in the fortunate position where if something's really not ready, where it's too young and it hasn't come to be, then we change their tasting notes around and swap that product out and just let them know that, in 7 days we'll be back on course, but we don't want to sell you something that will disparage, your brand, our brand, the cheese's brand. We want to sell it at its best. So, but on the whole, we're really fortunate that they trust us a lot. So they just call up and say, we want the five cheeses, and then it will arrive with tasting notes, and then their front of house are just like ready to go because all the tasting notes are there. The videos are there of me talking about what I do with the cheese. So they're all primed.
Very cool. Tell me a little bit about how you work with your suppliers.
Yeah, so because affinage like is a really weird concept in the UK. So in France, the traditional method is that, you know, I'll give you 100 cheeses, you mature those 100 cheeses. I'll give you 50 of those cheeses back to sell. You haven't had to turn them, the labor costs, you've been able to make more in your storage, and I'll take the other 50 and sell it to make a profit. And there's no real structure in the UK for that, and we're still trying to find our feet of how it would work. So a lot of people like giving us the cheese, not sacrificing any money, but then billing us at the end of it. But we're really trying to push people towards the idea of let me take, 100 of your cheeses, work out what that cost would be to you, and that's saving. You don't have to turn them, look after them, sell them ultimately. And guess what? You get to make another 100 cheeses because you have the room. So, in terms of affinage in a kind of business mechanic, we're trying to find our feet in the UK. In terms of our relationships with our cheesemakers, they're amazing. They're we're a real community connected bunch, and there's a huge support that goes both ways. And I was in London last Tuesday, which was at a Northern Ireland Invest kind of like tasting, and it's just they're kind of like your best friends. You won't see them for a while, but you've kind of got this connection where things are being ordered, things are coming in, and it's just amazing. You know their families, their favorite cows, what they because someone asked me what makes like me a cheese expert, and I was saying I think the biggest string to my bow is that this selection of cheeses that I mature, I've been tasting them week in week out for the last 11 years. Like for such a variable product, it's amazing to have that timeline.
Hmm.
And I know when the cheesemakers were struggling, particularly through COVID. I know recently with the weather that we've had over here, the droughts. I know how some of them were struggling and scared of kind of electricity prices. And I remember the initial rise of veganism and how some of them were struggling with that category. And these are really sweet
Yeah.
people. Like they are not equipped to deal with the really militant veganism educated kind of that area. These guys are just people who have like 100 cows, have this really beautiful reciprocal relationship with their cows. I mean, when you go to, I remember when I first captured this moment. It was probably about 5, 6 years ago. And it's Johnny again at Baron Bygod, and he uses Montbéliard cows, which
Hmm.
are really high quality, great for cheese. Pain in the ass to kind of look after and bring over here and start that tradition, but thank God he has, because it's a remarkable cheese. But cows are naturally very shy, and I remember when I first went into his kind of his paddock with him, and they were out to graze, and they were all very wary of me.
Sure.
But Johnny, there's this kind of, you can see in their eyes that they're like around him. They look at him as like they're just someone who they care for, and there's just this reciprocal relationship that they have. And I think whenever I think about cheesemakers, I think about that moment and how reciprocal that relation is and how respectful it is. And yeah, and that kind of is a string through everything that I do and what I think about, and that's how my relationship works with our cheesemakers in Britain.
So is it? I think that at least in some parts of the continent, affineurs, that's really just what they do, and the distributors are entirely separate bunch. I think Hervé
Yeah.
Mons is kind of pioneering that sort of combined vertically integrated model on the continent. I think that's kind of what it sounds like you do. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So there was this kind of clear fork in the road. Do you make cheese or do you mature it? I find it far more fascinating to look at loads of different styles and find that familiarity between each different style of cheese, and cross-pollinating molds to see what reactions we get. So yeah, that's full on, obviously bringing the cheese in, working with the cheese makers, maturing the cheese, selling to restaurants, selling to people at home. That far more connected stream allows you to get really direct feedback,
Hmm.
for better, for worse. And then, if you've got your notes and your tasting notes on each batch, then you can go back and see, like, one of the things we do with our restaurants is that we kind of have a look at their sales data. So if I'm ever curious of what their customer bases are like,
Hmm.
I will throw like a rogue profile in there. So for want of a better term, make it easy, I'll do something really ripe or really young. And then I'll start to look at the sales data and see how much they bought of that particular cheese, and how that went through. This is the same with deli customers in the UK. And you get to ascertain, what that profile's like for their customers. But is it the same in their region, the area? Because there's a geographical kind of, but when we move more north in the UK, territorial styles and crumblies and become more popular. But as we go more south, the breeze get more popular. Then out to kind of Cornwall, sort of on the sort of boot of the UK, you're getting more cheddary. So it's really, but that's a rough summarization that I'm thinking about in terms of that. So yeah, does that answer the question? I'm not quite
I know,
sure.
I think it does. I also wanted to ask you about what you do with regard to seasonality. Do you kind of lean into it? Are there adjustments you make or find that you have to make in terms of how you age the cheeses from spring to fall to winter?
Um, yeah, I kind of don't think there's as much of a huge gap in terms of seasonality within cheese. I'm kind of controversial on this. Obviously, when we come through to lambing season, sheep's cheeses come online and things like that. That's kind of that is seasonality. But I think a lot of people have these ideas that lush pastures and cows and that create really big, massive flavors changes within cheese, and I think that's a really nice sentiment. But I notice differences batch to batch, week to week, and I see so much good in when a cheese would be deemed out of season, and equally when it's in season. So there's some cheeses that I drop, sort of I rest for like a month or two when maybe it's not working out and the maturing rooms with the cheese maker just aren't coming together. We need a breather to recollect our thoughts. But on the whole, it stays very consistent actually. And like I said, because I'm lucky enough to have this breadth of customer all across the UK, there's always a home for those styles of cheeses. So yeah, so that's a bit of another half answer really, but I don't I don't strongly believe in like this real massive amount of seasonality that we don't particularly see. We've got quite a consistent climate in the UK that,
Yeah.
yes, it is hot in the summer and cold in the winter, but we're not at those polar opposite, yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, scales. Yeah, 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 yeah. I also think the biggest change that I notice in a lot of my cheeses is usually the switch between feed and pasture. So, like that coming inside and going outside, kind of switch. That there is a 4 to 5 week period where it does seem like the cows are getting, or the
Mm.
cattle, getting used to their new diet. Um, and I would say that's the biggest change in quality that I see coming through to the milk, where we will stagger that and throttle those cheeses that kind of come through at that time, to just make sure that the handshake between that period is far more smoother, and we're not alienating any customers in that point, because it's the worst thing, isn't it?
How do you find that switch affects the cheese?
Yeah, it was so. Do you know what? The biggest, good question. The biggest visual difference that notice, and it's hard to explain, but I can look at the cheeses and they just seem more curdy. They just seem more dense and a little bit more rubbery in texture.
Hmm.
And if I was going to look at them, it would, because a lot of what I do is visual. It They kind of look like scrambled eggs more.
Ha!
Like, and it's my one kind of marker that I have, that my son, he loves scrambled eggs, but I do them really creamy, and he loves them really rubbery.
Mm.
so we have to overcook his, and I always think of that texture. There's something similar that I find between them, and that's when I think, there's something going on here which I probably won't be able to control. Actually, it's something directly in the cheese making process that I can try my best, but the product coming out isn't going to be, at that supreme level. So yeah, that's the real big difference I find. And naturally, sheep's milk, when that colostrum, the first milking comes through from lambing season, is like in another world. That is an amazing period for cheese. If you can get it, and cheese in that golden spot that was made with that, sort of first milk kind of area. It does two things, and two things only. Either the cheese will be legendarily terrible, or it will single-handedly be one of the best cheese experiences you have of your life. And I love sheep's cheeses for that.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite.
Mm.
What is the weirdest thing you've ever had happen in a cave?
Um, yeah, this was a really weird one. What, the two actually, and they're all mold based. Obviously, I love my one. It's kind of like a murder mystery, really. Um, no, nobody died, but
Yes.
what yes, but one of the most oddest things was, we had a sort of a clean down in the maturing room. So we do obviously frequent minor clean downs, but we've got to be careful about the amount of cleaning materials that we use, because we want to keep the biome frequent and things like that. So we had a good clean down, so a bigger session, no stone unturned kind of approach. And Mike, who's our technical director, we went in there the next day just to see how things were. We just happened to be in there. And in the center of the room, it can only be described as a little mass of mold, but it must have developed overnight.
Hmm.
Because there is no way anyone missed it. And the only way to describe this mold was a little bit like, someone got a cream egg, a Cadbury's cream egg. Do you have cream eggs in America?
Do
Okay.
we do? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, otherwise this description is utterly useless. And it looked like someone went in there and dropped a cream egg, slammed it on the floor.
Huh.
So it was white, orange with a sort of brownish outside, and you can't, but sort of the size of a sort of curled up fist. Um, and yes, hasn't ever come back again. It was something that seemed next to impossible to grow out in 24 hours. And we had a similar thing with this. I like to call it kind of like the Harry Potter sorting hat mold that appeared on a selection of blue cheeses. So yeah, closed the door. So what would that have been? It would have been about 4 o'clock in the morning, and we had a cycle where we were out for about 24 hours, and then we came in, and it only could be described as these brown mold which looked like a witch's hat on top of all the cheeses that just developed in such a quick, unbelievable amount of time. And they're two things that I've witnessed, and I've seen with my own eyes. So uh, um,
What did you wind up
and
doing with that, with the brown mold?
searching high and low of what it was, and
Yeah.
the nearest thing that people could work out was, and at that time that was kind of like in the infancy of what we were doing. We didn't have, the microscopes, kind of the mini kind of amateur lab that we have now to kind of do that cross comparison and work out what strains it could be. But yeah, and the cheese making community, they've all got kind of like weird things like that happen. It would have just been something that was in the area, and it just happened just that once,
Huh.
and then it was gone. Yeah, so that's very weird, and in its entirety, the COVID period of the amount of virtuals and things I was doing when I think about that was unusual, because I wanted to bring people into our environment and what we did. So I did a lot of recording and live virtuals, and sometimes I felt like I was in there sort of 24 hours a day, turning the cheeses, but then recording stuff and then doing stuff live on virtuals. That was quite a weird experience to almost live in the maturing rooms, for a good
2 years.
solid couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 years. Yeah, yeah, mm, yeah.
Very cool. Um,
Mm.
what is the one thing that you wish people understood about what you do?
Um,
So you go to
God,
parties and you say, "I'm an affineur," and people say, "What's an affineur?" And so I'm like,
yeah, yeah. That's a hard one, really. I think the thing I do wish is precisely what you said, that everyone knew what an AFA was and the amount of hard work that goes into what we're doing. But I think in general, I wish everyone knew the hard work that goes into artisan cheese. It's really simple to flick the switch for some people. I was doing a tasting. It was at a local vineyard to us, which is called Saffron Grange, phenomenal vineyard that we've been working with for a very long time. And I had a little bit of a rowdy bunch because it was late in the evening. It was a wine tasting all day, and I had a bit
mm,
of a rowdy bunch. And someone was kind of sort of almost disrespecting kind of what I did. It's quite unusual, loving cheese in the way that I do, brushing, turning, and I said to them that the cheese that they were eating was turned 323 times, and I had my maturing charts on me, the record. Um, and it just completely stopped them in their tracks because that's madness, isn't it, really, when you're turning a cheese so many times, and when people see a cheese in its entirety and, sort of, 25 kilo wheels being turned that amount of times, it becomes really visual for people. And I just wish people knew the differences. Actually, that's what it is. The differences between artisan cheese and mass made cheese. I'd love if people just knew, they both have their place in this world. They
sure.
really, really do. And I talk about this a lot, but because I'm obviously very, very pro artisan, it seems like I'm biased in some way. They both have their place, but one is machines and kind of geared towards profit, and capturing your attention for short amounts of time so you eat more of it. And another one, which is artisan, is a pure labor of love. It comes the product first, the flavor experience, and everything comes after that in terms of profit and all that. So, I've given multiple answers there again, but I think actually if everyone in the world understood what artisan cheese meant in comparison to mass made, I think everyone would be a lot more happier because everyone loves it when they have an artisan cheese and they find out who's the cheese maker and what their relationship is with their community and their cows and how it is the heritage of that cheese and that make and how it's been passed down for culture to culture. And is particularly what I specialize in is British artisan cheese, how that encapsulates that everything that is kind of, in my eyes, and is great about this country, our countryside, our animal husbandry skills, the camaraderie between cheesemakers and communities of artisans. So, and I think if everyone understood those differences, I think everyone would be a lot more happier.
I think that's a great place to stop. Harry, thanks so much. Where
Thank
can
you.
people find you online? And if they want to, if they're in the UK, maybe just passing through London, where can they sample your wares?
Yeah, yeah. So online, if you just search Rennet and Rind, and all our social medias are at Rennet and Rind. If you want to see more about me on Instagram and most things, I'm Perry Matures Cheese. And yeah, if you're in the UK, then I highly recommend that you visit Cambridge. It's a phenomenal place with a phenomenal food scene, and most of the good, great restaurants in the in Cambridge. If you ask for the cheese, more than likely it will be matured by me.
Thank you, Perry. Thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me and Perry for this episode of the Curd-verse. So far in the podcast, we've pretty much talked entirely about aged cheeses. So next time on the Curd-verse, we're actually going to go in the opposite direction and take a look at perhaps the largest category of cheeses in the world, fresh cheeses, which are at their peak right now in early spring. So please join me again next time as we once again enter the Curd-verse.